Good evening. It's 8 o'clock in Yerushalayim. This is WebYeshiva.org, and it's time to begin our regular halacha shir. The topic we're going to focus on this evening and next week in Yetz Hashem is eating on Yom Kippur. Well, everyone knows that in life-threatening situations, if of course it's correct, of course it's proper, v'chai b'hem, of course what you're supposed to do in a life-threatening situation is do whatever you have to do to deal with the life-threatening situation, and if that requires eating or drinking, go for it. I mean, everyone knows that. But of course, as soon as we begin to look at the opinions of the poskim, we will find large differences of opinion about exactly how to implement these rules. And those are the opinions which we're going to be looking at tonight and next week. If you have any questions in the course of the class, feel free to type your question on chat, and I will see your answer on my screen, and I can incorporate the answer to your question in the ongoing shir. I know that not all of you are from English-speaking countries. If it's easier to type a question in French or German, Spanish, Portuguese, or whatever, feel free. Feel free. Well, I don't know Hungarian, but I do have a lot of other languages. Let's get started with the material. I know where it is. I think it's here. Voila. Okay. Now, we're beginning with a halacha in the Shulchan Aruch having to do with Shabbat, because the definition of threat to life is identical in Hilchot Shabbat, Hilchot Yom Kippur, or anywhere throughout the length and breadth of Torah. It just happens to be that since Shabbat is the most common situation in which threat to life sets aside halachas, that's the context in which it's discussed. And I'm not going to bother to tell you exactly where I draw the sources from, because you have that on the screen, and feel free to check out the sources and correct my typographical errors. I'm not a very good typist. Shulchan Aruch says, Maka shel halal, any blow, trauma, injury, which is internal, halal, which is inside the body, ein tzricha omed, requires no evaluation. Someone who has a blow, a trauma, an injury, whether it's the kidney or the lungs, and anything internal, requires no evaluation. You don't go asking a doctor, you don't to take the time to ask a physician, is this life-threatening or not? Halacha presumes that every internal lesion is life-threatening. Afilu ein sham b'kiyim, you don't need any expert physicians around. Chola eino omer klum, even though the patient says, well, I don't know, I don't feel so threatened. I realize that I have an internal injury. I realize there's internal infection. I understand there's something wrong with my liver, pancreas, whatever it is. I understand that, but I don't feel my life is in danger. And of course, we didn't ask a doctor because we just said that no evaluation is required. Just the existence of an internal lesion, the existence of a maka shel halal, osim lo kol sheregilim la'asot lo b'chol. You do for this patient. It's talking about the context of Shabbat, but the same thing applies on Pesach. Whether eating chametz is important, or Yom Kippur, eating or drinking anything, whatever the context is, you do whatever you would do during a weekday, during an ordinary day. And you'll notice in passing, there's, according to this, Shulchan Aruch, this is the text of the Shulchan Aruch, according to this, there is no need to minimize the violations of Torah. Once the presumption of threat to life is in place, because we know there's something wrong internally in this person's body, that creates a presumption that the patient's life is in danger. You just do whatever you would normally do, disregarding the fact that at the moment it's Shabbos, at the moment it's Pesach, at the moment it's Yom Kippur, or whatever the mitzvahs happen to be. Now, at this point, I want to add an historical note. Back in the good old days, when all was right with the world, before the ruination of modern times came, in antiquity, in the Middle Ages, up until modern times, part of medical training. I speak only about the Western world. I don't know much about the history of in East Asia or Africa, but as far as the Western world is concerned, medical training in antiquity through the Middle Ages until modern times, medical training involved fasting. That is, people who were in training to be physicians were taught about fasting. Some medical conditions require fasting in order to speed recovery. Other medical conditions prohibit fasting. The patient has to eat. And indeed, in pre-modern medical training, the topic becomes quite complicated because for certain medical conditions would require a full fast. Some would require only partial fasts, what you're allowed to eat, what you're not allowed to eat, what you're allowed to drink, what you're not allowed to drink. Uh, and this is something that physicians were trained in pre-modern times. And therefore, in pre-modern times, physicians had a professional opinion regarding fasting. If the rabbi would call up the physician and say, a member of my community is suffering from such and such a medical condition, infection of the pancreas or whatever the medical condition is, and the rabbi would then ask the physician, is this a medical condition which requires fasting in order to cure the patient? Or is this a medical condition which requires eating? And if so, what has to be eaten? What do you have to drink? What are you not allowed to drink? What are you not allowed to eat? And a well-trained physician had a professional opinion. This was part of medical training, and this was part of medical practice until all was ruined with modernity. And in the Western world, again, I don't know anything about Asian medicine, African medicine, and so forth and so on. But in Western medicine, there is no medical school. In Western medicine, not Hadassah, not the Hebrew University in Yerushalayim, not Harvard, not Cambridge. There is no Western university which teaches the medical students anything at all about fasting. Fasting has totally dropped out of the curriculum. Now, if you think about it for a moment, I hope you will agree with me that there are a limited number of sources upon which medical knowledge is based. I speak now about modern medicine. Modern medical knowledge, Western medical knowledge, is based on the following sources. Number one, the physician knows what he or she was taught in medical school. That's one source of medical science, one source of medical knowledge, what the physician was taught in medical school. Another source of medical knowledge is what the physician has read in ongoing journals, right? A physician tries to keep up with modern developments, ongoing developments in his or her field. You read about studies which are being done all the time. You learn more about medical knowledge, about medical science. Um, the so there are two sources. What one is taught in medical school, what one reads, what one studies. When we're looking into contemporary medical studies, a third source of medical knowledge is the physician's personal experience. A physician who has treated such and such a disease many times in many patients has learned a lot by treating patients and knows what to expect. Now, these, as far as I know, are the only sources of medical knowledge in Western medicine today. Therefore, unlike the ancient or medieval physician who, if called up by the rabbi by telephone and asked about a specific medical condition, whether fasting is called for or not, the modern physician, if he or she is honest, and I hope they are, the modern medical practitioner, if the rabbi calls up the physician and asks, "Oh, for such and such a medical condition, this kind of infection of this kind of this organ, what does medical science have to say about fasting?" Well, the physician should say, "I was taught nothing about it. I've read nothing about it, and I surely have not had nearly enough experience with this specific disease and fasting. After all, who would fast with this disease? And therefore, I have no experience with what fasting does. And this does fasting hasten recovery or impede recovery? And I don't know. If you want my guess, I could guess that fasting is not good for the patient, but that's not based on anything I was taught or any studies which have been done or my experience. Um, well, this opens the question for how to establish whether or not a patient is or is not in a life-threatening situation. According to Shulchan Aruch, um, no evaluation is required if we know that there's an internal medical problem. If that's clear, then the presumption of halacha is that the patient is in danger until proven otherwise. And therefore, whether it's Shabbat or Yom Kippur or whatever it is, the halachas get set aside. And apparently, with no need to, according to Shulchan Aruch anyway, with no need to minimize the violations of, in this case, Shabbat or Yom Kippur. Now, let me add to this one more very important conceptual point. Um, I, among my many failings, among the many things I lack, I do not have the power of prophecy. And therefore, I do not know what is going to happen in the future. And the same could be said of modern physicians. They're not prophets and not expected to be prophets. Um, is such and such a patient going to die? Uh, well, probably, maybe, in all likelihood, but definitively, no. You need a prophet to know what's going to happen in the future. Yes, broken bones are internal lesions for sure. The no doubt about that. The There's a little bit of machlokas about exactly where the borderline is between internal and external in the body. Some hold the lips, in which case the teeth, a broken tooth, is already considered internal. Others hold that the teeth are still considered external and only anything more internal. Exactly where the border is between internal and external is a little bit controversial, but that's a problem which rarely arises. Knowledge, knowing that someone is going to die unless you do such and such, uh, only a prophet has such knowledge. And therefore, no one can say definitively that if the patient fasts on Yom Kippur, he or she will die. I mean, that's a prediction of the future, which only a prophet is capable of doing. Therefore, let us set this idea aside as being quite impractical, unless you have a prophet available. There is, however, a far more practical principle, and that is Suffolk, Sakanat Nefashot. Let me get that typed on chat. There you have it. Suffolk, Sakanat Nefashot, correctly spelled on chat. If one is in doubt about whether or not life is in danger, Sakanat Nefashot is danger to life. Now, let's understand something about the halachic meaning of the word Suffolk. The halachic meaning of doubt. What is a doubt as far as halacha is concerned? Now, I know that what I'm about to say flies in the face of modern physics. I know that what I'm about to say is simply wrong according to the theory of modern physics, but the realm in which I'm speaking, I'm quite confident that in the realm we're about to deal with, what I'm about to say is correct within the halachic realm that I'm speaking, even though physicists might disagree. Suffolk, doubt, does not exist in reality. If I do not know whether or not a piece of meat is kosher or treif, well, the doubt does not exist in reality. The doubt exists in my mind. In fact, the piece of meat is either kosher or treif. There is a fact, one way or another. Suffolk, doubt, exists in the mind of the observer. We'll come to diabetes a little bit later. The Suffolk, doubt, exists in the mind of the observer. Uh, in reality, it's either one way or the other. In reality, it's either kosher or treif. But if I'm in doubt about that, the doubt exists in my mind, in the mind of the observer. And therefore, as far as Suffolk, sakanat nefashot, is concerned, as far as a doubt regarding threats to life is concerned, if that doubt exists in the mind of the observer, and it can be the patient observing himself, it can be the patient observing herself, or it can be a third party looking at the patient. If the doubt exists in someone's mind, this person might die. Suffolk, doubt. A doubt exists in my mind as an observer, and I might be observing myself or observing someone else. This can be a this could be a fatal situation. This person might die if he or she does not eat or drink on Yom Kippur or Shabbat or whatever the context happens to be. Well, as long as that doubt exists in the mind, then it is correct to act on that doubt. Suffolk, sakanat nefashot, the existence of the doubt in the mind of the observer that the patient's life might be in danger, the patient might die, that calls for action. And if the action called for violates Shabbat or violates Yom Kippur, so be it. The Of course, not every thought that passes through your mind is a valid halachic doubt. After all, there are people out there who might be compulsive. There are people out there whose minds might not work exactly like mine does. Of course, mine is the perfectly normal brain. Mine is the standard of all correct thinking. But there are people out there who are always in doubt about everything. There are people out there who always think they're going to die, or there are people out there who always think that someone's going to, well, This, of course, raises the question of what constitutes a halachically valid doubt. You have a doubt in your mind, you think, oh, this might be a life-threatening situation. Now, is that a valid doubt to be acted upon as far as halacha is concerned? Here comes the rule. In order for a suffix, in order for a doubt to be actionable, in order for a suffix to justify violating whatever the mitzvah is, Shabbat or Yom Kippur, the suffix must be rooted in a real event, in a real observation, in the real world. I'll give you the example of the Gemara, and once you understand the example of the Gemara, you'll be able to apply the rule in a simple, straightforward way. Everyone knows that leading up to Pesach, you have to clean your house and make sure there's no chametz in the house. Everyone knows that. And part of the procedure is after you have cleaned your house thoroughly, you have to check, you have to examine your house top to bottom and make sure that there's no chametz in it. Well, everyone's familiar with these halachas. So the Gemara talks about a situation in which the house was thoroughly cleaned and thoroughly checked. We know that there's no chametz in the house because we looked everywhere. That's a fact which has now been established. After having established the fact that there is no chametz in the house, because we looked very carefully everywhere, well, now someone observes an animal with a piece of bread in its mouth entering the house. Well, an event occurred in the real world. An animal with a piece of bread in its mouth entered the house. Is there now chametz in the house? Don't know. I know that at least for a brief time there was chametz in the house because I saw the animal go in. Did the animal walk out the back door and the chametz is no longer in the house? Maybe. Did the animal eat the chametz and it's no longer in the house? Maybe. What is the status of my knowledge regarding chametz in the house? Suffolk. Maybe. I saw it go in. There was an event in the real world. I saw it go in. I know that at one point there was chametz in the house because I observed the fact in the real world. Is the chametz still there? Don't know. Suffolk. Here we have an actionable suffix which requires re-examining the house, and the suffix is rooted in an event in the real world. This is very different from suffix ha'oleh b'libo. Let's get that typed. A doubt which arises in your mind. A doubt which arises in your mind but is not rooted in any observation of an event, a fact in the real world. It's just a suffix, just a doubt which arises in your mind. That's of no standing at all. That is not actionable and must be set aside. For example, even normal people like me who do not suffer from any form of compulsion, I might be in doubt about all kinds of things. I'll give you an example. You'll understand an example and you'll be able to apply this very easily. Imagine for a moment that I open up the drawer in my kitchen and I take out a fork from the drawer in my kitchen. I look at the fork for a moment, and a doubt arises in my mind. The doubt which arises in my mind is, did I ever bring this fork to the mikveh? If it was not immersed in a mikveh, so I'm not allowed to use it. If it was immersed in the mikveh, now I am permitted to use it. I don't remember whether I brought this fork to a mikveh or not. Indeed, I don't remember when I bought this mikveh. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. I think it's my age. You go back a long time. I don't remember what country I was living in when I bought this fork. I surely don't remember having brought it to a mikveh. I don't even remember where I bought it. If I bought it, maybe someone gave me a set of silverware. I really don't. I don't know. Well, this is not an actionable. This is not an actionable doubt because it's not rooted in any event in the real world. I open up the freezer and I take out a wrapped piece of frozen meat and I look at it and I wonder whether this is kosher meat or not. Uh, where did I buy it? When did I buy it? It's been in the freezer for months. I don't even know how many months it's been in the freezer. Uh, um, don't remember. Don't remember. I don't remember putting it in the freezer. It's a long time ago. Is it Well, here's another example of of what halachically would be categorized as a compulsive doubt. It's a doubt which has arisen in my mind, and the doubt is not rooted in any fact in the real world. Is not the doubt does not arise out of any event or fact in the real world. Halachically, this is not actionable, and one should just forget about it. Ah, now, um, uh, 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 let's go on with the text of the Shulchan Aruch. Kisheyodim umakirim ba'oto choli shemamtin me'o tzarech hilul. If the patient is suffering from a disease where you know that there's no rush. You're familiar with the disease. It could be an accident, could be a broken bone, whatever it is. You are familiar with this condition and you know that there is no rush. You know that there's no immediate threat to life. Even though it's an internal lesion, if you know, no doubt about it, if you know that there's no rush to treat it, if you know that there's no rush to eat and drink on Yom Kippur, it can wait. This typically happens in the afternoon as the end of Yom Kippur is approaching. If you know, no doubt about it, if you know definitively, not a doubt, not a maybe, but if you know definitively that there's no rush to eat and drink, then there's no reason to eat and drink on Yom Kippur. So the presumption of internal illness creates the halachic situation in which it's correct to eat and drink, and according to Shulchan Aruch, apparently without any limitation, unless you know definitively that there's no rush. Now, there are two principal commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. There's the Taz on the inside margin, the Magen Avram on the outside margin. The Magen Avram, in his commentary of Avram Gambiner was his name, 17th century Poland. He in his commentary points out, Mashma sha'af al pi she'ein bo sakana b'meniat hadavar hahu. Since the Shulchan Aruch said you do whatever you would do on a weekday in the Shabbat context, since you do whatever you would do on a weekday, that implies, quite clearly implies, even if what you're doing is not actually saving the patient's life. The patient's life is in danger. That eliminates Shabbat from the world. The patient's life is in danger, well, presumably in danger. We think there's a suffix. We're in doubt, maybe. It's enough to have the maybe. Maybe the patient's life is in danger. That sets aside Shabbat considerations. That sets aside Yom Kippur considerations, and you just do whatever you would normally do, even if what you are doing at the moment is not actually contributing to life saving, but it's something which you would do for this patient during the week. Uh, um, the patient is either at home or in the hospital, wherever the patient is. Patient is indeed in a life-threatening situation because we have this doubt in the mind, and Well, during the week, one would use the electric motor to raise the bed, lower the bed during the week. One would switch the lights on and off in order to make the patient more comfortable. During the week, you would do all kinds of things for the patient, which really are not saving the patient's life, making the patient more comfortable. That's very good. But if you would do it during the week, if you would do it when it's not Yom Kippur, if you would do it when it's not Shabbat, one can does exactly the same procedures on Shabbat, on Yom Kippur. Suffolk, sakanat nefashot, a doubt about whether or not life is in danger, cancels Shabbat from the world, cancels Yom Kippur. You just go about dealing with the patient as though it is not Shabbat, as though it is not Yom Kippur. That's the way the Magen Avraham understands the Shulchan Aruch, and that's fairly straightforward. Now, at this point, we meet the opposing opinion. Up until now, everything we've seen argues for treating the patient exactly the same way as you would if it were not Yom Kippur. No minimization, no need to minimize the violations of Yom Kippur, no need to minimize the violations of Shabbat, just to do whatever you would normally do. That's the opinion we've seen up till now. Now we're going to introduce the other opinion, according to which in life-saving situations, you should minimize the violation of halacha as much as possible, minimally set aside the fasting, that's eat and drink the minimum amount necessary in order to save the life. This is the other opinion. It's in the Biur halacha. You know, the Mishnah Brura, surely on anyone's short list as the most authoritative modern source for halacha. The Mishnah Brura is divided into three sections. There's the Mishnah Brura proper, which just has brief formulations of the halacha. This is permitted, this is prohibited, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. The Biur halacha, typically printed on the inside margins, where on certain issues, like this one, the Biur halacha goes into greater depth of analysis. And at the bottom of the page is the Sharat Tziyun, which is mostly just references to his sources with occasional additional notes. We're going to be looking in the Biur halacha now. One of the comments which he adds in depth to this halacha that we're talking about, setting aside Yom Kippur in cases of threat to life. Shulchan Aruch said, ignore the fact that it's Shabbat, ignore the fact that it's Yom Kippur, ignore the fact that it's Pesach, and just do whatever you would do for this medical condition any other time. Zehu Lashon Haramban b'Toras Adam. The Shulchan Aruch is quoting word for word the opinion of the Ramban. This from the literary point of view is quite interesting. The Shulchan Aruch, what I'm about to tell you, I'm not 100% sure is true. I'm about 95% sure that what I'm about to tell you is true. But the text of the Shulchan Aruch, it seems to me, I'm fairly sure this is correct. The text of the Shulchan Aruch is a cut and paste job. Every phrase, every halacha, every paragraph, every sentence in the Shulchan Aruch has been cut from the text of one of the great Rishonim, one of the great medieval authorities, and pasted together. What Rabbi Yosef Karo did was he took word for word the opinions of the great medieval authorities, the Rishonim, and edited them and put them together into the Shulchan Aruch. So in this sense, there's really nothing original in the Shulchan Aruch. What makes the Shulchan Aruch such an authoritative work is he carefully decided which Rishonim, which medieval authorities to quote. In this case, he's quoting the Ramban. Shabbos is canceled, Pesach is canceled, Yom Kippur is canceled when dealing with life-threatening situations. Katav Magid Mishnah, the author of the Magid Mishnah is done. It's a little bit an anonymous work, but it's in Ashkenaz, definitively Ashkenaz, and definitively from the 14th century. But exactly who wrote it is not known. Mizel mashma da'af al pi she'ein bo sakana b'miniat oto davar. Even though what you're doing is not actually saving a life, but it is something you would do during the week to make the patient more comfortable. Go for it, and you do it on Yom Kippur as well. That's the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch we've seen up till now. At this point, the Bir Halacha introduces the other opinion. Lani Dati, in my humble opinion, Tzarich Iyun, this approach of the Shulchan Aruch requires some thought. I'm not happy at all with this approach of the Shulchan Aruch. I'm not happy at all with the opinions of the Shulchan Aruch. It seems to me, the Mishnah Berurah writes, many Rishonim, many medieval authorities disagree with the Ramban upon whom this Shulchan Aruch rests. And I put ... He goes on and lists them in a very long list. This opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, rooted in the thinking of the Ramban, is highly controversial. Shacharei matnitin biyuma chola machlino al pi bekim. Well, the Mishnah already taught us that a sick person on Yom Kippur is fed according to what the expert physician recommends. Below umdana ein ma'achelin, and therefore, if you don't have a qualified physician who has recommended eating and drinking, the patient doesn't eat and drink. Just because the patient is in a life-threatening situation doesn't mean all of Yom Kippur vanishes. You still need a qualified physician to tell you what the minimum amount of eating and drinking is that will set aside the patient's threats to life. You need an evaluation to figure out how you can minimally set Yom Kippur aside. And this is surely the opinion of the Tosafot and the Meiri. And well, he goes on with a long list of poskim who say you have to minimize the violation of Yom Kippur, and the way to minimize it is to consult with a qualified physician who will tell you the minimum you have to do in order to save the patient's life. Since we're talking about someone who is in a life-threatening situation, therefore, according to many Rishonim, you need an umdana, an evaluation, which can only be performed by a qualified medical expert. Will tell the medical expert will say whether ta'anit, even though patient during the week we would feed up as well as we could, even though during the week we would bring to this patient the best food we could find, on Yom Kippur we need a qualified medical opinion about what the minimum amount of food and drink might be. Afal Pikein b'Yom Kippurim be'inin umdana. Yom Kippur requires an umdana, requires a professional evaluation by a qualified physician to tell us the minimum amount of eating and drinking that will be sufficient to set aside the threat to life. Rashi understands the text exactly this way. Al pi bekim, when one feeds the patient according to what the qualified physician instructs. Im yomru she'eno mesukan im eno ochel, if the qualified physician says this patient must eat or drink, and these are the quantities, then we do what the physician says. Memela, hu adin le'inyan chilul Shabbos, and it's the same principle on Shabbos as well. We have to find a qualified specialist who will tell us what the minimum violation of Shabbos is that will save the patient's life. Shabbos doesn't vanish in the case of threats to life. Yom Kippur does not vanish. In the case of threats to life, we minimally push aside Shabbat. We minimally push aside Pesach or Yom Kippur, whatever it is. We violate the mitzvah as little as possible in order to deal with the threat to the patient's life. So now we have the other opinion. Going to the first opinion, do whatever you would do. Going to the second opinion, seek a qualified expert who will instruct you about how to minimize the violation of Shabbat, Pesach, Yom Kippur, whatever it is. Now let's turn to the modern poskim, the Helkas Yaakov. He was a disciple of the Avnei Nezer. Well, he was one of the big names in Eastern Europe in the beginning of the 20th century. These are his words. Hutra. Shabbos is completely permitted. All the prohibitions of Shabbos vanish when we have threats to life. This is exactly what the Maggid Mishnah, well, we know the Maggid Mishnah is quoted on the previous screen as well. If someone's life is in danger, we do for that patient whatever we would do in a non-Shabbat situation. If it's Yom Kippur, we do for that patient whatever we would do in a non-Yom Kippur situation, even if the specific steps we're taking are not necessary to save the patient's life. This is the opinion of the Magen Avram. We know this already. It was on the previous screen. This is the opinion of the great rabbi of Lodi. That's the way the poskim talk about the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. He was the rabbi of the town of Lodi. So when they say the great rabbi of Lodi, they mean the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, according to the opinions of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, of course, are extraordinarily precious within Chabad circles, but even outside of Chabad circles, he was one of the important poskim. Hare kol shu chol yesh bo sakana Shabbat chol l'gabe. The rule is that the prohibitions flowing from the mitzvah, Yom Kippur, Pesach, the prohibitions flowing from the mitzvah vanish when dealing with life-threatening situations. Therefore, someone who is sick on Yom Kippur, therefore, there's no reason to minimize the amount a patient who is in a life-threatening situation is eating, no reason to minimize what they're eating in order to eliminate the threat to life. The patient should eat and drink fully without any limitation. He goes on and says, this is still the same text of the Helkas Yolev. Od kasha de amai kaimal the Mishnah. After all, it says in the Mishnah, Ein ma'achelin oto mechatzer kaved, ya'an shuraksku. You can't feed the patient the dog's liver. What on earth is the Mishnah talking about? This is a Mishnah which comes in Tractate Yuma in the middle of the discussion of Yom Kippur. In the middle of the discussion of Yom Kippur, the Mishnah raises the situation where someone was bitten by a rabid dog, a dog with rabies, hydrophobia. A dog with rabies bites someone. Now, what do you do? What's the treatment for Well, yeah, nowadays you go to a hospital and get an injection, and if you do it quick enough, and if you're otherwise healthy, you will recover from the bite of a rabid animal, as long as you get the injection pretty soon and you're otherwise healthy. Back in those days, um, the treatment for someone suffering from the bite of a rabid animal was to kill the animal, take out the liver, you take out the dog's liver, and you feed the patient the liver of the dog. That was the cure for rabies back in those days. And the Mishnah says Jews don't do that. That's the non-Jewish treatment for uh, for rabies. We Jews don't do it because, well, I don't have to tell you, you're not allowed to eat dog's liver. I mean, dog's liver is not kosher. I mean, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? And it works. Dog liver works as a treatment against rabies only as a skula, as a supernatural cure. Since using the dog's liver is a segula, a supernatural cure, we do not set aside the prohibitions of Yom Kippur for a supernatural, for a skula, to cure the patient. Only for treatments. Only we set aside Yom Kippur only for remedies, for treatments which work according to the rules of the natural world. No supernatural, no skula is for during the week. Well, if it would be a liver of a kosher slaughtered animal, that you could do if um, are there kosher? I'm trying to think for are there kosher animals which carry rabies? At the moment, I don't think so. Uh, well, it's easy enough to look up the facts. If there are kosher animals which carry rabies and you get a bite from one of those animals, then indeed you could slaughter the animal in a kosher way, fry up the liver and eat it. But not a treif one because it's only a supernatural remedy. Hare, b'kol makom yesh l'chol niach da'ato im na'aseh lo skula. But think about it for a moment. Patients who are suffering from whatever medical condition it is might very well be calmed. It might make them feel calmer. It might make the patient feel better if one does a supernatural cure. Magic might make the patient feel better, might make the patient feel more comfortable, might make the patient calmer. And that's often true. After all, many people believe in magical cures, and the magical cure at least is going to make the patient feel better, feel more confident, feel calmer, and therefore if it were not requiring a violation of the mitzvah, of course you would do the magical cure. But in this case, the magical cure, the liver of the dog, happens to be a non-kosher cure. That's why we don't. But at least it makes the patient feel better. And think about it for a moment. The Mishnah says, Isha, a yoledet, a woman who is giving childbirth, who is blind. A blind woman is giving birth. Why not? And the blind woman says it's nighttime, middle of the night. She's giving birth in the middle of the night. Yeah, back in the old days before they had artificial illumination. Uh, uh, and the woman who's giving birth in the middle of the night, she's blind, but she says, I'm very nervous. The mialedet, the midwife, has to work in the dark. The midwife has to work. It's Shabbos. It's in the middle of the night on Shabbos, and the midwife cannot light a candle. It's Shabbos, and I'm nervous. The woman in childbirth, the blind woman, says, I'm nervous that that the midwife is not going to be able to do her job properly unless she lights a candle. It's dark. It's dark in here. Uh, the midwife says, "Don't worry, I can handle it. I've done this a million times. I don't have to see anything. It's enough that I can feel with my hands. I've done this a million times. I quite literally can perform my duties as a midwife. I can quite literally do it with my eyes closed, blindfolded. I don't need to actually see anything." The midwife is perfectly confident that no candle need be lit, but the patient is nervous about this. The halacha, according to the Mishnah, is you fetch a candle and you light it on Shabbos. It's the middle of night Shabbos. You violate Shabbos not because it's necessary to set aside any threat to the patient's life. The midwife assures us that there's no need, but lighting the candle will make the patient more calm, will make the patient more confident. And in order to make the patient feel better, in order to make the patient feel calmer, in order to reassure the patient, it's correct to violate Shabbos, even though the qualified physician, or in this case the midwife, says, uh, as far as medical science is concerned, there's no need for this. Let's take this one step further and you'll understand how it works. In practical situations, a patient is dying in the hospital, and the physician says this patient doesn't have long to go. As far as medical science is concerned, there's nothing more we can do for this patient. And it's Shabbos, and it's Shabbos, and the patient says, "I would feel better if my family were would join me and would stand around in my last moments. I want my family with me as I'm dying." Well, in concept, that's no different than lighting the candle on Shabbos for the blind person. Having the family there is not going to save the patient's life. But if gathering the family together will make the patient calmer, more confident, uh, that justifies violation of Shabbos. Of course, one would violate Shabbos and fetch the family members and drive them to the whatever violation of Shabbos is necessary to get them to the hospital to stand to be together with their loved one at the end of his or her life. Of course, one would do that, not because we're engaging in a life-saving procedure, rather because we are making the patient feel better, more confident, calmer. This by itself is sufficient to set aside the prohibitions of Shabbat, Pesach, Yom Kippur, whatever situation we're talking about. כמו שהתירו שילוח קרובים בשבת, just like the Shulchan Aruch flat out permits fetching the relatives to come and stand by the patient's bed on Shabbos at the end of life, even though this is a violation of Shabbos. The family has to violate Shabbos to come and be by their relative. The patient who says, "I want my family here," Vaday Shari, of course, it's permitted. Uh, well, why then do we still prohibit feeding the patient the liver of the dog? If it's going to make the magical cure, if it's going to make the patient feel, it doesn't work, but at least it'll make the patient feel better. Isn't that enough? Yesh Hashem, we have to explain this. Magid Mishnah Rak b'Shabbos Sover Shnehutra. According to the sources we've seen, only Shabbos gets set aside in life-threatening situations. Yom Kippur gets set aside in life-saving situations, but kashrus, no one mentioned. No one mentioned setting aside kashrus considerations. Masha en kein ba'achilas Yom Kippurim Dirak Techuyim Bazeh Rak La'asir Sakana Mutar. Maybe we should embrace the stricter opinion. according to which we must minimize the violations of Shabbos, just like we are taught to minimize the violations of kashrus. If violating the commandments of kashrus will contribute to saving the patient's life, the medicine, which works b'derech hateva, according to the rules of nature, not according to skula, not according to supernatural rules, but if the medicine which works according to the laws of nature is made out of the liver of a dog, go for it. Maybe we are being instructed here to minimize the violations. Mahai time and eerily, therefore, it seems to me, it's correct to violate Yom Kippur in order to becalm the patient, in order to make the patient calmer, in order to make the patient feel better. And this is what we learn from the case of the woman, the blind woman in childbirth, who's giving birth on Shabbos night. It's correct to bring a candle and light a candle, even though lighting the candle is a Torah violation of Shabbos. It's permitted for making the patient feel better, even though medically there's no need for it at all. This is then the opinion of Chelkas Yaakov. He repeats this opinion elsewhere. Rabbi Hanan Wasserman, the great disciple of the Mishnah Brura, repeats the same opinion. The Tzitz Eliezer, who was one of the great poskim here in Eretz Yisrael throughout the 20th century, he repeats the same opinion. Bottom line, we're left here with a great leniency that if an activity, if an action, if a procedure will make the patient feel more calm, go for it, even if that action requires violation of Shabbat or Yom Kippur. Up to this point, we've seen the two basic approaches. That of the Shulchan Aruch, rooted in the sources we saw, according to which you just do whatever you would do during the week. That's the more lenient opinion. The stricter opinion, taught to us initially by the Bir Halacha, the Mishnah Brura, rooted on a long list. We didn't go through the whole long list, but a long list of other great Rishonim, minimize the violations of Shabbos as much as possible. Now, what we're going to do is just introduce for a moment the opinion of the great rabbis of Brisk, who have a way of harmonizing both of these opinions and simultaneously embracing both of them. We're just going to introduce this opinion, and next week we'll go into it in greater detail. The Sefer HaChinuch, another anonymous work of one of the great Rishonim, probably from Rav Aaron Halevi, probably, but a very weighty and important and influential work of the Rishonim, even though I cannot name its author, says, Mishu Chola, someone who's sick, Afal Pi she'ein bo sakana gemura, even though he's not definitively and clearly in a life-threatening situation, im yeh chalush habe, someone who's just very weak, that's all, very weak. Someone who's just very weak, but not clearly suffering from any internal injury, not clearly suffering from any internal disease, not clearly in a life-threatening situation, just very weak. Feed him or her minimally. And next week we'll speak about exactly how many cubic centimeters of this and how many milliliters of that is called minimally. We'll get to these measurements next week. Now this idea of the Sefer HaChinuch is quoted by Rav Zevin. Rav Zevin was one of the big rabbis of the 20th century. And he, in turn, quotes the opinion of the great Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik. I think the Soloveitchik, the rabbinic family of Soloveitchik is very well known, I suppose, I hope. The first well, actually the second generation, the second of the great Soloveitchiks, the great rabbis of the Soloveitchik dynasty. The Soloveitchik dynasty was Rav Chaim. He was the Rav of Brisk in Lithuania. And Rav Zevin quotes Rav Chaim Soloveitchik as having instructed patients who were in life-threatening situations to eat and drink normally on Yom Kippur without any without any attempt to minimize. It's curious that the opinion of Reb Chaim we know about only by a quotation a century later by Reb Zevin. We don't know it from his own published works, but his opinion was apparently well known in the town of Brisk, and everyone was talking about it. And Reb Zevin reports that that was his practice: eat and drink normally. And next week, we're going to see how he harmonizes the two opposite opinions, brings them together, and simultaneously embraces what seems like two contradictory opinions. That'll be for next week. Until then, I wish you a good week, a safe week, eventually a Shabbat Shalom, and look forward to seeing you all again next week. Until then, Shalom, Shalom.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you very much,
Have
Rabbi.
a wonderful week. Bye-bye.